Welcome to Pencils Down, a Finalis podcast. This is a show for listeners wanting to learn more about the ins and outs of the private securities brokerage landscape. Each episode will feature insightful conversations with the world's leading investment bankers, placement agents, capital providers, startup CEOs, and more. And with that, let's get into the show. Matt McConnell, thank you so much for joining us here on the Pencils Down podcast. It's great to have you.
Well, very excited to be here. My initial podcast, and what better place to have it?
I should let our listeners know that this is an unusual podcast in the sense that you are actually, Matt, are a member of the Finalis team. And we wanted to invite you on to share a little bit, not only about your background, but a little bit more about this new and exciting line of business that Finalis has just rolled out, which is extending our relevance outside of U.S. borders in a very meaningful way. Just to get the ball rolling, I usually start by asking our guests to share a little bit about their backgrounds and specifically the path they took into the securities space. I know that we could probably spend the entire podcast just talking about your career, which has now entered its fourth decade. But it would be, I think, of great interest to our listeners if you could sketch just in a few minutes the arc of that story. Was there a common thread to your experiences in the investment banking, in the security space? Would be very curious to hear that story from your perspective.
Sure. Once again, thanks very much. And I've thought a lot about this, quite frankly, and it's a great opportunity to sort of put some thoughts into words and discuss it. So I was very fortunate to start my career in the back office, which didn't feel so at the time, but what it did, it allowed me to understand the plumbing of the business and how things work. And when I moved to international sales training sometime afterwards, this was really at the beginning of U.S. investors investing overseas. Settlement is everything, more than execution, more than anything at all, more than the research, et cetera. And understanding the process and what went behind it really elevated our position in the market at the time. And that really propelled me into, quite frankly, we were in a leadership position at Morgan Stanley in international trading. And I think, quite frankly, the continuity of the back office and understanding it helped with that. In terms of continuity of the career, when I moved more from sales trading to sales management and then into more capital markets type roles, I would say the most defining characteristic really is hiring and having the best team available. Hiring people, maybe not necessarily for a specific role, although that generally comes into it, but having the best possible players, because with that, you have flexibility, you have a deep bench, and you are able to create, I think, a culture, aiming toward one theme, really. And I think it's very important. Whereas if you're just constantly cycling people in and out without a theme or a culture, it doesn't go well. So again, I think the common theme of success in the places I've worked, I've been lucky enough to work, has been hiring the best people possible and having a deep bench and culture to go along with it.
Those are all great, and obviously, here at Finalis, that element of culture is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and working to further develop, because it becomes kind of a part of your rocket fuel as a business if you are able to have a well-defined and cohesive culture. And we could probably spend a lot of time just talking about that topic and all of the kind of unique challenges of working in a distributed context as it relates to building and sustaining that culture. I wanted to dig in a little bit further on your specific background and experience as it relates to delivering regulatory and compliance solutions to foreign investment banks that might be interested in accessing the U.S. markets. Share a little bit about what that path in your career has looked like.
Yeah, well, thanks. I think the defining aspect there is really the Rule 15a-6, for those that are not familiar, from the SEC allows foreign financial firms to enter the U.S. through a chaperone broker. And I think what that's really done is, like many other things, democratize the process in that it allows foreign financial firms to come in and show U.S. investors a variety of products and investment ideas that they would not be able to do so without 15a-6. Because quite frankly, most foreign firms are not going to devote the $1 million or whatever it is to establish a USBD. So this really opens the whole world up to come into the US and offer products, services, and ideas. Without it, quite frankly, we'd be stuck with just a couple major players. It really levels the playing field. I think gives the US institutional investor a wide variety of choices, really, of where to invest and how to invest. And the technology clearly comes into play with this, and that's another theme. While I have the mic, um, the biggest change I've seen really in the business is on that theme. It's the democratization, with the little d of information. Whereas, in the legacy times, the sell side had a monopoly on information. And with that, they could price things accordingly. The buy side had to depend on the sell side for all information, whether it be about the economy, whether it be about companies, whatever it may be. And it really was unlevel. The internet changed that. And we clearly have a position today where the buy side has as much or more access to information than the sell side. So hedge funds, mutual funds, large money managers have that power, and it's changed the whole paradigm of the business, really.
No, it's so interesting because what you're talking about is fundamentally a trend in favor of democratization or supporting, the so-called long tail of investment banks, placement agencies, and independent deal makers that's playing out not just in the United States but globally. And that democratization is in some ways enabled by regulatory changes, which in this case you're talking about 15A6, which is a new regulatory solution that Finalis is offering to the market, but is also accelerated by technology. And there is examples of how that technology has facilitated, for example, to your point, less information asymmetries between the buy and the sell side, but also the ability for a company like Finalis to scale its regulatory value proposition to thousands of boutique investment banks, placement agencies, and deal makers that are sitting outside of the US but might want to access the US. When you speak with these foreign investment banks and deal makers, I'd be curious to understand, just from your perspective, what you're hearing from them with respect to what their pain points have been historically in accessing the US markets, and maybe parlay that into kind of how Finalis is delivering a solution that might be of interest to them.
Yes. Well, the pain point generally is okay, how do I get to the US in a compliant manner? And many have tried over the years. Well, you could probably do so for a period of time without going through a broker dealer or so, but eventually people get caught, and it creates a lot of friction, time with lawyers, et cetera. So the compliant act is important, but the technology angle is equally important because it cannot be phone calls, emails, et cetera. And I think that Fed, what you've created, what Finalis has done in terms of you created technology to address a particular pain point, not the opposite where you're throwing technology on top of an existing business. Because I think in the latter, you spend a lot of time untangling the wires. And I think the way Finalis was constructed to allow and enable smaller size, at least initially, investment banks and boutiques to run their business efficiently really extends and scales to the rest of the world in a way that, with one sign in to have access to our regulatory platform, our other goods and services is very powerful rather than phone calls, emails, etc. It's, as I say, it's an amazing platform.
I think what's interesting there, Matt, is this notion of technology not being a panacea, right? I mean, technology isn't going to solve all of your problems, but if you deploy technology in the places where that pain is most acutely felt, then you're going to be in a position to deliver a great deal of value. There's no shortage, as you know, of software companies out there that purport to deliver some sort of deal making capability. And I think what's interesting about the way that Finalis has been trying to address this is, well, recognizing that the industry has evolved in a certain set of ways, the regulations are written in a certain set of ways, but that if you deploy technology nimbly and behind the scenes, you can actually deliver a tremendous amount of value back to users. And I'm just curious because I know you've spent some time in kind of more traditional financial services firms, not technology companies like Finalis, but in those financial services firms, there has been a delivery of some sort of a regulatory solution. And I'm just curious to understand, from your perspective, how is that technology truly a differentiator in that client experience relative to the type of experience that they might have had in a more legacy business that just delivers the regulatory solution?
Right. I think it comes back to the concept of the technology was built first to address the pain point of foreign investors coming in. So, with that, the way Finalis is designed really is to be able to, with a single sign on, people deal with both the regulatory aspects, deal room, upload of deals themselves, and distribution of deals all in one shot, in a manner of speaking. Whereas a lot of the legacy platforms, there may be one portal to take care of the regulatory aspect, something else in terms of the deal flow, something else in terms of the personnel involved in the deal or the trade, all disparate and separate. Whereas if we have one platform designed to address that with one sign on, it makes a big difference.
Excellent. Let's maybe just zoom out and talk a little bit about some of the trends that you're observing or that you've been observing in the course of your career as it relates to this space. One of the trends that Finalis has sought to really take advantage of is just the fact that there appear to be more and more small investment banks, placement agencies, and independent deal makers, not just here in the United States, but globally. And I'm just curious to hear your perspective or your theories, perhaps, regarding why this might be the case. Why are we seeing this long tail of investment banks growing quite as significantly as what we've been observing over the last several decades?
Yeah, it's been an amazing growth. And quite frankly, all the growth I've seen really over the past 8, 10 years in the chaperone space has been in the small investment banking boutiques. That's where the growth is. And clearly, it's a matter of a fair amount of people all over the world, both emerging and frontier markets, not to mention the developed markets, that have expertise, have books of business, and they don't need or want to work at a big firm, and the ability of once again the use of technology to be able to run a small business and do a couple M&A transactions a year, a couple private placements a year requires technology both on domestically where they are, and then we have the technology to be able to bring that business into the US, whereas 20 years ago it couldn't have happened. But now small firms can operate remotely in on small teams. They can outsource many goods and services and run very efficiently. But that has clearly been the growth in including frontier markets where this you never would have seen that a number of years ago.
You mentioned frontier markets, and I know you've spent, a large portion of your career operating within those markets. Just curious to get your perspective on the development of the private capital markets there. One of the things that I've observed is that, there continues to be a great appeal from foreign investment banks to enter into the US markets because the US private markets are so well developed relative to the rest of the world. But I'd be curious also just to get your perspective on, over the course of your career, how you've seen those markets develop and to what extent what that trajectory looks like in terms of the further development of private capital markets in those regions vis-a-vis the United States.
Well, it's really interesting in the sense that if you look at Africa and some other underdeveloped areas of the world, you have the second mover advantage, and that they've sort of skipped the traditional checking accounts and charge cards and so on, and moved directly to online banking and microfinance. And along with that, there's been a proliferation of firms and platforms, as you mentioned, to address that, and to some degree ahead of the US in terms of microfinance and so on, and non banking financial institutions. So that's been a great opportunity for people to raise money and basically move finance to the next level. Whereas in the US and the developed markets, we just don't have that as much, which is really fascinating to me in taking advantage of the mobile phones and that type of thing.
It's incredibly fascinating to watch, and I'm sure we're gonna we're going to continue to see a lot of exciting developments as it relates to the frontier markets and how they participate in the private capital markets. It is clear, though, that with this 15A6 solution and some of the additional international regulatory plumbing that Finalis is going to be rolling out over the coming years, that there's a tremendous opportunity to further democratize access to the private capital markets in this space, and that the regulatory side, which historically has been the biggest pain point for many folks in the long tail, is going to become a critical accelerator to enabling folks' ability to plug in. I just wanted to maybe just take a step back and reflect a little bit with you on kind of Finalis' own storyline and how that relates to that international strategy. So we at Finalis found you this last summer as we were embarking on our efforts to broaden our scope beyond the U.S. markets, to appeal to investment banks globally through 15A6 chaperoning, and also with beginning to establish foreign regulatory approvals in a variety of overseas jurisdictions. It's clear, given your background, Matt, that your value to this key strategic goal of Finalis was obvious from the start. But I have to say, I'm curious to hear your perspective on, what was it about the Finalis pitch that really stuck with you? Obviously, Finalis is a different type of business than the enterprises that you've worked with in the past, and I'd be curious to just hear your perspective on what you found interesting or intriguing about taking the leap into a startup like Finalis.
Yeah, it's a couple pronged process with it. One being the fact that it was built, as I said, mentioned before, technology first to address a pain point. Can't discount that, how important that is to build that first. So that technology being very powerful and evolving is number one. B, I think the marketplace, which is I guess really I guess in the beta form right now, but to me was very attractive in the sense that we have the ability to allow our foreign affiliates to post deals in our universe of deal makers, quite frankly. And to me, by nature, foreign financial firms are going to have the ability for them to take part in our universe of over 200 investment banks, and not to mention just the U.S. capital markets in general is very powerful. And it's one of the things I think I pound the table on is that when foreign financials are doing pitches internally or domestically, their ability to say we have access to U.S. capital markets in general, and then the Finalis universe specifically is very powerful and should help them win mandates. But the marketplace technology is just very key to that. I think that value proposition.
Yeah, and I think it bears mention that Finalis is not simply a technology enabled regulatory and compliance solution. It has also built a category creating deal syndication environment in which, leveraging the fact that there are now over 165 investment banks, placement agencies, and deal makers on the platform, there's also over 800 active mandates on the Finalis platform that's worth an aggregate of over $17 billion in deal potential. And that as Finalis continues to scale, the network itself delivers value back to each of its individual participants. And that network is reflected through that marketplace environment that you mentioned.
Yeah, very much so. And I know we're about to roll out the directory, which once again, from my point of view, representing rest of world, the ability to a foreign financial firm to come in, look at our directory of other people in our space, and they can talk about their attributes, the sectors, the things that they're good at. The ability to collaborate is quite high. And again, by nature, people coming from overseas probably will need help in some aspects. So it would be very, very powerful for me to look at with my book of business.
So if you had to briefly summarize, Matt, how Finalis's 15A6 chaperoning solution materially differs from the solutions that have already been out there in the market, how would you summarize that for a listener?
I would say the technology being better, and then B, it's more than just the regulatory environment. The regulatory is obviously first. You have to have the regulatory cover, but beyond that, we're giving our foreign affiliates the tools to help make money and find clients in the US, whether it be the legal library, the data rooms, and the marketplace. These are all really, very important things for people to have, not to mention expensive to do on an ad hoc basis. I don't think anyone else provides that, menu-based list of services.
Very interesting. Just to maybe just zoom out for a minute, about a month ago, Finalis' community manager engaged in a little intellectual exercise in which he was asking members of the Finalis team to offer up one word, just one word, to characterize what they thought the global economy would look like at the end of this really tumultuous year in the markets. The responses that he received were pretty varied, and there was no point of agreement or commonality in them. I think your response encapsulated that variety quite perfectly in the sense that you had selected the word chaos. A month or so later, are you still holding on to that prognostication, Matt? Has the current midterms changed that at all? I mean, what's your view with respect to how this might impact Finalis' clients if indeed the global economic system remains mired in what you're referring to as a state of chaos for the foreseeable future?
I'll stick with my word chaos for starters. Okay, midterms or no midterms. I do think between the situation in Ukraine and the ensuing food insecurity, energy insecurity is not going away anytime soon. So, despite obviously a rocky situation in the states with the midterms and divisive nature of things, I think the U.S. still remains the most liquid market, and I think that you see where the dollar is reflects that. So, I think the U.S. will remain the place where people will want to raise money for starters. That will remain, but I do think the world remains a dangerous place, and I think there will continue to be chaos. Realignment of Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, all these places. It's all in flux more so than it has been in some time now. So I'm going to stick with chaos.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I guess lastly, Matt, tell me a little bit about what the last several months have been like for you joining this new environment, and to what extent has that reinforced your sense of the type of opportunity that we're building towards?
Yeah, it's been very exciting. I like to say you're drinking through the fire hose to some degree. There's a stated org chart, and then there's the real org chart as to who actually does what, like any place. And it takes a while to figure that out, but it's just great to be part of it's a team of very smart, motivated people. And, the plenty of help. You just raise your hand and things, people will help you. And it's just great to have the support and the people on the platform. People are very motivated, which is a testament to, I think part of being a startup. People understand, take nothing for granted, I would say.
Yeah, and one thing I often say, Matt, also is that Finalis doesn't necessarily need to embody the values or the norms of the industry that it's disrupting, right? And there's an opportunity as a startup, as a technology company, to chart our own path and build our own unique culture, irrespective of the cultures of the organizations that people were coming from, right? Because by definition, we need people with deep experience like you to join a place like Finalis, because it is exactly that experience which is going to inform the nature of the solutions that we deliver back to the market. It's just that the way in which we deliver that solution is packaged and scaled differently because it's fundamentally packaged as a technology offering. And so that's why you need to bring this motley crew together in order to get it to work. So thrilled to count on you and your support. Just a final note is, and really just as a plug for Finalis' own 15A6 chaperoning solution, how can people find you and reach out to you in the event they want to learn more about what we have to offer to foreign investment banks?
Obviously, the Finalis website, you can link me that way, and certainly via email.
Excellent. Well, we'll add that information to information about the podcast so that people can find you, and very much look forward to continuing to grow this new and exciting line of business alongside you, Matt, in the days and months ahead.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and very excited to be part of it.
All right, take care. Finalis is a broker-dealer platform with everything that M&A advisors, investment bankers, and placement agents need to succeed. We deliver a broker-in-a-box regulatory affiliation solution, replete with tech-enabled compliance, research and analytics, deal lifecycle management tools, and a first-of-its-kind deal marketplace. Learn more at www.finalis.com. You've been listening to Pencils Down, a Finalis podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. That helps us keep covering the latest in the private securities brokerage landscape. Thanks for listening. Until next time.